Well, thank you, Jyoti, and Divya, and Nancy, and to Vicky. It is a real pleasure to be here in my hometown of Chennai and to be addressing such a warm, inviting, and of course familiar audience, because I know many of you in the room here today, and thank you all for coming and being here. And so, Cherie, welcome to Chennai. I know it's the first time you're here, and I'm delighted that you've taken the time to be with us.
Well, I'm very glad to be in your hometown and also to have met your parents who are here tonight.
Yes, so Cherie, you and I have worked together at the foundation for a little over a year now, and I'm always inspired to hear your story of breaking through a rather male-dominated legal profession and how you started your career. It's a really inspiring story, so please do share it with us now.
Well, I think I'd say, first of all, I was just lucky, because I was born when I was, which was in the second part of the 20th century, where I was in Western Europe, actually in Liverpool, the city of the Beatles, at a time when things were changing and when opportunities for women were starting to become a reality. So to some extent, I was able to go with the flow. I think for me, the most important thing was being brought up by two strong women, my mother and my grandmother. My father left his family and abandoned us, my mum, my sister and I, when I was 8. And my mother had to go out and keep the family and earn a living, which in those days, at a time when to be a single mother was a big stigma, particularly in the Catholic community in which I grew up, when there weren't the rights that women later had, was a big challenge. Now, neither my mum nor my grandma had been educated beyond the age of 14. My grandma, because she was a working class girl and no girls did get that education then, and my mother, because her own mother died, leaving her with her father, who was a miner, and her younger brother. And she had to give up her schooling in order to actually act as the mother in her family. So she and my grandma were absolutely determined that my sister and I were going to have those opportunities for education and for advancement that they had never had. And often people say to me, oh my goodness, you've come so far. And I often say, but who knows what my mother and my grandmother could have done had they had the opportunities that I have had. And I'm sure everyone in this room must also know that, because I know that many of you will have strong women in your backgrounds who didn't have the opportunities which are now opened up for women here in India, and particularly, even though I've only been here a bit, I've already recognized that Chennai is a place of vibrancy and opportunity. So, it turned out I was quite a clever girl. So I got a scholarship to my grammar school, where the nuns told me, Cherie, if you put your mind to anything, you can work hard, you can achieve your aims. And so I went to university, the first person in my family to go to university, and I read a law degree at the LSE, and again, I turned out that I was quite clever at that as well, and I became the top student at the University of London in law that year. And the next year I went and did my bar finals to qualify as a barrister at Lincoln's Inn, and it turned out that I was the top student in England and Wales that year as well. So I thought, well, this is good, isn't it? Just as they said. There you are. If you work hard and follow your dreams, everything will be fine. But then reality hit. This was 1975-76. And I got an opportunity to do my pupillage, which is like an apprenticeship. And at the end of my apprenticeship, I realized, well, first of all, only 1 in 10 of the barrister's profession were women. So throughout my first year, I didn't actually ever see a woman stand up and say anything in court, except possibly as the usher announcing the judge coming through the door. And then in where I was working, there was a vacancy. And my pupil master, the person who'd look after me, said to me, Cherie, there's one space here. and we've got 2 candidates. One is a boy and one is a girl. So obviously, despite the fact that you came top of the bar finals and he got a 3rd, and despite the fact that you got a 1st and he got a 2-1, we're obviously going to go for the boy. He was good, he found me a place elsewhere. But it was my first reality check to realize that as a woman in the 70s in the United Kingdom, there were things that the world thought I should not do. The irony of all this is that here I am, it's nearly 50 years now. Next year, I'll be 50 years a barrister. So here I am. I was a pretty good bet. As for the boy, in 7 years, he'd given up the bar and went off and did something else. He also married me. So sometimes, girls, if you can't beat them, you've got to use them.
Wonderful. I love the punchline to that story. So, Cherie, why is women's entrepreneurship in particular important to you? And tell us what led you to set up the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women.
Well, I think the other lesson I learned from my mum and my grandma, obviously we weren't impoverished, but we certainly weren't the wealthiest people in our neighborhood, and I certainly wasn't the wealthiest person in my grammar school by any means. So I saw my mum and my grandma make so many sacrifices to ensure that we could even afford the school uniform. And I realized very early on that, you know, in this world, I've just been to see Oliver, actually, Oliver the musical. You know what Fagin says, in this world, one thing counts, in the bank, large amounts. And if, you know, you don't have financial independence, which my mum found to her cost, of course, when her husband abandoned her and she had to work in a fish and chip shop. Then she managed to get a job in a department store and ended up as a manager in a travel agency chain. For a long time, she would train the young men that would come in under her, and they would then all get the promotions. Because again, she was a woman, so how could she be? By the end, she had become a manager herself. But you know, it was very clear to me that, one, women need financial independence, because financial independence gives you choices. It gives you the choice to walk away from an abusive relationship. It gives you the choice to decide what you can do towards your children's future. It gives you the choices to decide what you want to do for yourself. And so that was very important to me, that women have to have financial independence. As for entrepreneurship, you may know that barristers are self-employed. So essentially, I was a one-woman business, even though part of a wider group of barristers. And so I felt that affinity with other women who were setting up their own businesses. And when, as chance would have it, you know, my husband became Prime Minister, and then I started to go around with him and sometimes without him. The Foreign Office, whenever I went anywhere, would always do two things. One, they would always make sure I met the Chief Justice and the lawyers, which is great, because I love lawyers. I do. Most people don't want to speak to lawyers, but I like speaking to lawyers. But the other thing is they would also introduce me to women. And across the world, I suddenly realized that there were many women who also wanted that financial independence, who were also trying to make a way in a man's world. Many of them were in the position, this is now 2000, in the position that I was in the 1970s. They were having some opportunities, but there were still barriers. Others that I met were actually more in the position of my mum, you know, which was, there were pretty limited opportunities and barriers about why women would want to do anything for themselves in many ways. And I thought, this is an area that when we left Number 10, I could do something to contribute. At the time, people weren't talking much about women's economic empowerment. There were the charities, I'm involved in some of them, that deal with alleviating women from poverty, but it tended to be giving them resources rather than helping them build their own resources. Or it was about violence against women, which is also something I feel very passionate about. So women's economic independence, I thought, was a place where I could make a contribution. And that's why I focused on how do we help women not just set up businesses, but also grow and expand them. Because the other thing is, you go around, when I started in 2008, and I'd say, I'm thinking I want to set up a foundation to work with women's financial independence, women's economic empowerment. They'd all say, you mean microcredit. And yes, of course, that's important. But you know, for every group of 10 women who are in a microcredit circle, one of them actually may be very good at business. But the small amounts you get from microcredit are not going to enable her to take the next stage. And what about the women like me who are educated and who want to succeed in their profession, but who find those barriers? So I was very keen to do something not just about the very poorest, but also about the missing middle, the people you talked about when you talked about the work that you do. You know, there are layers of opportunities for women, and at each layer there are barriers. And we should not ignore any of those layers, because each time a woman succeeds in any of those places, she becomes a role model, an example, a pioneer for other women.
During my time at the foundation, I have had the opportunity to meet many of the women entrepreneurs that the foundation supports. And I'm always struck by the sheer resilience and ingenuity of these women. And in terms of financial independence, Cherie, as you talked about, each and every one of them talks about the transformative impact that entrepreneurship has in enabling them to become financially independent, and the ability that then gives them to be able to create better futures for themselves, for their families, and indeed have a positive impact on their wider communities as well. And you talked there about meeting a number of these women entrepreneurs during your time at Downing Street, and I know since you set up the foundation in 2008, you've met many, many women entrepreneurs and heard their inspiring stories. So share with us a story or two that has stayed with you.
I will, but before I do, I want to take up one thing you did say, because, you know, back in 2008, we were saying this. It's not just women who are going to benefit from this. It is the economy that's going to benefit from this. And I read in my briefings that the Indian economy could have an increase of 27% in its GDP if it only provided opportunities for women entrepreneurship in the same way as it provides for male entrepreneurship. Time and time again, we hear that empowering women, giving them financial independence, actually does increase the world economy. It's billions across the world. And yet, despite that, we still find that when it comes to the money in the world, it does not go to the women. You know, in the highest levels, when you're looking for venture capital, only 2% of venture capital goes to women-headed businesses. You know, and it's so as though somehow they still think that women are a risk. Actually, all the figures show that women are less of a risk than men. Anyway, let's go to the stories. I have been very lucky because when I started the foundation, I wanted to do some work in India, mainly because I knew a lot of diaspora Indians who were living in the UK, many of whom supported my husband and his party, and because of that, I'd got involved with many people in the UK from the Indian community, and had also had the opportunity to visit. We visited India on a number of occasions. I could see that dynamism and that power and that intelligence that the women of India have, and so I wanted to do something in India. And so some of the very first programs we ever did as a foundation were here in India. And because of that, we learnt from your experiences as to what works and what doesn't work. But I wanted to talk, I can talk about so many, but one I always remember very well. At one point, we did a program in Maharashtra with Mandeshi Bank, which is a microfinance bank, and they give loans to women. And we entered into an agreement with them because my foundation, we do not set up our own organization. You know, we partner with organizations like this organization to provide our expertise in technology and our expertise in how to use technology to reach more women. So we did this program with Mandeshi Bank. They provided the loans, and we provided around that business training to the women they were giving the loans. Because, you know, sometimes when you give women a loan, they use the money to the things they're used to doing, but don't think about what's the market for this skill? You know, is there a market for another traditional embroidery? Or can I use that skill to do something different with the skills I've got, where I can provide an unmet niche in the market? It's these sort of ideas. Too many women in small businesses don't even understand that the money for the business is not their money. And a crucial thing to get over, for example, is to separate your household money from your business money. So it's lessons like these that we were giving. So we actually took a group of our funders to India. We went to see a number of things. One of the things we did is we went into the countryside outside of Mumbai and visited our program there. And I met this amazing woman called Dhanashree. And Dhanashree had a small shop in the village. And at one point, she was slicing something in her shop, because it was a grocery type shop, and sliced off her left hand. As you can imagine, this was a terrible, terrible disaster. It sent her spiraling into depression. It was a disaster for the family. But she heard about Mandeshi, and she came on the course. And as a result of the training and everything else, when I went to see her, she had diversified her business and was earning now 4 times as much as she had before she'd gone on the course. And she was... But, you know, she was an amazing woman. I asked her about her day. She got up at 4 o'clock in the morning in order to milk the family's cows. Her husband worked with the farm. I said, couldn't your husband do it? She said, well, he hasn't got the gentle hands that I have. I'm thinking you've only got one hand. But she did that. When she did that, she went back and then she prepared breakfast for everybody and got her kids off to school. She then went to the shop and worked in the shop. She then came back at night, milked again, cooked again, and she would go to bed at around 10 or 11 o'clock at night. You know, she worked constantly, and I just couldn't imagine how I could possibly have coped with one hand and still do that. And her biggest ambition was to make sure that she earned enough money to send her children to school, which she did. And I met her daughter, and she wanted her daughter to become a doctor. And her daughter was going to go to university, and that was what she was working all those hours every day to make sure that her daughter got the opportunities that she didn't have. So obviously resonated with me, a girl whose mother did so much to make sure the same was true for me.
Thank you for sharing that inspiring story about Dhanashree, and I think it really showcases the obstacles and challenges that women entrepreneurs often face. And at the foundation, we speak to thousands of women entrepreneurs who participate in our training and mentoring programs. And we also conduct primary research with women entrepreneurs across the world through an annual survey in order to better understand the challenges and obstacles that they face. And unsurprisingly, what women constantly tell us is that one of the biggest challenges they face is in accessing finance and accessing capital. And as you said there, Cherie, it's less than 2% or about 2% of business funding worldwide that goes to women-owned enterprises and businesses. And our research also shows that there are other significant issues that particularly impact women, such as really entrenched gender stereotypes, the burden of unpaid care work, and also the harms caused by online gender-based violence. So, Cherie, could you tell us, please, your thoughts on what we could do or how we could seek to address these issues as individuals or as organizations or even indeed as society as a whole?
Well, you know, you said one of the things is that women are supposed to fit into a man's world. So when we look at one of the reasons why women don't get access to the capital, it's essentially because the businesses and the criteria for loans are based on the idea that a business man is literally that, a man. You know, women have different needs. The basic one, of course, is that need for collateral for your capital. And in many parts of the world, of course, women do not have land as a collateral, and land is what's required. It happened to my mum. She managed to get a job, she was doing well, and she went because she was living with her mother-in-law. My grandmother was her mother-in-law, not her mother having died. And she wanted to raise a loan to buy a house of her own. But they said, well, you can't unless your husband signs for you. Now, at this time, my father was a famous soap actor in the UK. And he was also well known for his womanizing and his drinking. So the idea that this bank manager thought that the womanizing, drunk person that was my mum's husband would be a safer bet for the mortgage than her is absurd if you think about it. But that was how the system was set up. And we see it in so many other things. I've just been to Chittagong, where I'm chancellor of something called the Asian University for Women. And our commencement speaker was the head of Wellesley College. Wellesley College, that very famous women's liberal arts college, who are a partner of the Asian University for Women. And their current head is the first African-American to hold that post. And she's a doctor and a cardiologist. And she mentioned, you know, that the difference between men and women isn't just about two X's and an X and Y chromosome. That every single cell in a woman's body is slightly different from a man's body. And yet, all the medicines and the research are based on males. Which is why sometimes, you know, the heart medication, for example, she's a cardiologist, that you give to women, it doesn't actually do the same thing to women as it does for men. So again, in medicine, it's designed for men. So we have to make sure that we're designing programs that actually look at the reality of the people who you're designing them for. So for women, we need to look at, can we be more flexible in the loans? Women often prefer shorter loan periods. You know, in a place like this, can you use your jewelry or a future contract that you've got as collateral? We need to be more imaginative. It goes for training too, actually. One of the strengths, I think, of the foundation training programs are that they are based on women's experience and women examples. So we have a program called the Her Venture app, and the experience is all based on a woman entrepreneur who runs, in this case, a cake shop or a tea shop. Too many business training programs are apparently gender neutral, but actually the gender they're really geared to is the male. And so often that puts women off. The funny thing we've found is that, you know, women really relate to training that talks to their life experiences. But our Her Venture app, which has reached 100,000 women, has also reached some men, because it seems that men don't mind using a free app that's called Her Venture, because they still think it's about them. But often women, if they see something and it has a male figure in it, think, well, that mustn't be for me. So it's really important to have women-centered programs. That's one of the things we've learned. I've forgotten the rest of your question now.
No, that's great. And it's extraordinary to think that the World Economic Forum, their latest global gender gap report, predicts that it will take over 130 years for there to be parity between men and women. And if we look at economic participation and opportunity in particular, that number is 152 years. So the work that foundation is doing, and organizations like FLO as well, is incredibly important to enable that opportunity for women.
Absolutely. I feel very passionate about this because honestly, back in the 70s when I started, I was lucky. As a lawyer, I've done a lot of work around human rights and particularly women's rights. I had the opportunity to be engaged in pioneering litigation that established many of those rights. And honestly, if you'd asked me in 1976 when we first passed the first sex discrimination and equal pay legislation, I honestly thought, well, we've got it on the statute book, everything will be fine. And, all right, it's been difficult for me because there aren't that many women about, but by the time my daughter grows up, it'll be different. Well, my daughter actually is a barrister too, but I tell you, it's still it's better. Of course, it's better, but it's not completely equal at all. And now I've got 3 granddaughters. I've got 5 grandsons, but 3 granddaughters, and that 130 figure, that 150 figure, means this won't happen in their lifetimes either. It probably won't happen until their grandchildren. And that's unacceptable to me. That I'm determined that we are going to break that barrier and we're going to accelerate those figures, and I want to see this happen.
Absolutely. So, Cherie, a final question from me before I then hand over to Rinku, and I know Rinku has some audience questions as well. There are so many incredible women here today, and of course some gentlemen in the room as well, and they are business leaders, entrepreneurs, designers, artists. Do you have any words of advice or encouragement for them?
The one thing I've realized is I don't think sometimes we understand our power and our strength and our determination. And if we can channel our power and our strength and our determination, we absolutely can change the world. And we have to believe that we can make a difference. And using that, actually do something about it. And women are great at cooperating with each other. Look at this organization. Women's organizations like this are so important. It's so important to have a group that you can speak to and know that you share common interests and common difficulties. And that's not to say that you shouldn't also be in mixed groups. It's really important too that you're in mixed groups. But solidarity with each other, helping each other, whether you're mentoring some other young women, whether it's in where you get your supplies to your business from, can you involve more women in your supply chain, whether it's just accepting that some of you who are prominent in this society embrace the fact that you are a role model and use it to help other women. So if we work together, if we collaborate together, we can do so much than if we just try and do it on our own.
Thank you, Cherie. And before I hand over the microphone, I just want to take the opportunity to say a huge thank you to FLO, to Divya, and to Rinku. And I also want to give a special thanks to my dear school friend, Priyamada Balaji, who unfortunately couldn't join us here this afternoon, but who's been instrumental in pulling this whole event together. But thank you.